Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kiki Kleverhausen, your favorite unlicensed historian, and I'm gonna do something a little different today. First, I'm not gonna do my makeup because I cannot talk and do my makeup at the same time. That is not one of my talents. And I thought I would just make it a little bit more fun and I would go through a list of history's worst bosses. Now, this is not a complete list. There are more, and there's quite a bit more. But these are just a few that I picked out that I thought would be fun to do a very minor synopsis on what makes them a bad boss. And then don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like these videos. Let's get started with the first horrible boss, Mr. George Pullman. And to be honest, this gentleman really ran the gamut of beloved community hero to his family. Whenever after he died, his family had him buried 18 feet below ground and his coffin encased in reinforced concrete. HI here. Technically, George was not buried 18 feet below ground, but he really was buried with the reinforced concrete in a lead-lined coffin. Doing this and you think it's because he was a vampire, or perhaps if somehow he was possessed and if the demon got out, a plague would be unleashed on the world. No. It's because they were really worried that a former employee would dig up his body, at least one, probably more, that former employees would dig up his body and desecrate it. And I'm going to regale you with the tale of how he did that. George was a trained engineer, and honestly, he was actually really good at it, okay? His father had owned an engineering company and he took it over. Well, whenever he took it over, he wound up getting a contract with the state of New York because they were expanding the Erie Canal. And because of this, they needed to move some barns and buildings, right? They just needed to move them. He did that for them. Now, as he was doing this, in the success of him literally picking up and moving buildings, the city of Chicago was watching him, and they came to him and they're like, we want to hire you because we're so impressed with your engineering skills and how you do your little magic. Here's the deal. The city of Chicago was having a little bit of a problem with runoff, with drainage. Specifically, mud was constantly clogging their streets. So the city planners came up that what they could do is raise all of the buildings in Chicago by 10 feet. Fun fact, Pullman accepted the contract, did this, and he was so successful at raising the buildings up, and he was able to raise the buildings. They were able to stay open as he's working on their foundation underneath, right? So let's say you're at some fancy hotel, and if you saw Mr. Pullman there, there's a good chance that hotel was now 10 feet higher than when you originally walked in. But hey, guess what? No one's none the wiser because they're working on the foundation under, okay? Mind blown. But that's not where he made his money. He made his money by inventing, I'm gonna put this in quotes, inventing, the Pullman sleeper car. And all that this is just a really luxurious train car. He didn't invent the sleeper car, if you will, that already existed. But he was the one who really made travel luxurious and, let's see here, how should I put this? He made it luxurious and tolerable. Before this came along, before this all started, his company started in the 1860s, okay, by the way. What people would do if you had to travel by train. Basically the train companies would literally just put you in a car. The windows did not come down. A lot of these are being fueled by coal, so smoke would fill your little train car. It's 1,000,000 degrees because it's a tin box, and you just sat on these really hard wooden benches, okay? Train travel at this time, not quick, right? They're spending days traveling across the country or wherever they need to go, and they would further delay their trip because once they got to a stop that had a hotel, they were like, no, I need to get off this train. So Frank was able, because he was on one of these trains, he was like, this is shit, this is awful. So Pullman was able to use his engineering skills because obviously if you're in a train car, it can only be so big. And he figured out a way to basically, obviously make them luxurious, which in my opinion probably not that hard, but also make them multifunctional. And then he was able to to lease his train cars to the railroad companies. And not only that, but he also had it in the contract to where he would also get a portion of the tickets that they sold, the ticket prices. What really started this craze for like, oh, I want a Pullman sleeper car, he talked to the city of Chicago, and he's like, here's the deal. We know that Lincoln is going to be buried in Springfield. And Lincoln's his casket is being driven through the U.S. currently, or tracked through. And part of that is his casket train, if you will, arrives in Chicago and will be going from Chicago to Springfield. And Pullman is like, my president, R.I.P., is not going to be in a crappy train car. So he built a special train car so everyone could see, a special sleeper car, so everyone could see Lincoln's casket as it was traveling throughout Illinois.
Technically, the Pullman car did not just carry Lincoln's body from Chicago to Springfield. It actually started in Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois.
And they notice. They're like, that's like they're probably crying, right? They're like, oh my God, what's our president? I'm so sad. An Illinoisan. I don't know. Anyway, they're like, oh my goodness. This was sad. It was sad. But then they also noticed, they're like, that's a really nice supercar he's in. I would love to be carried. I would love for my casket to be in one of those sleeper cars. And Mr. Pullman was like, well, fun fact, you don't have to be dead to ride in one of my sleeper cars. So we're like, what? They were so excited for this. Okay? And that's when his company really took off. And his name really became synonymous with the Pullman sleeper car company. And it really became synonymous with luxury and just travel, okay? Like just the finer things in life Mr. Pullman provided to you for a fee. Because of his success, Pullman was flushed with cash, okay? And he did a lot for the city of Chicago, but one thing that he did was live out his dreams. He decided to build his an idyllic town just outside the city limits of Chicago. This town, I don't know if you're able to guess it, would be called Pullman. That's right. Okay. The town was 100% pulled by the Pullman Trade Car Company. Seriously, there was no government. He built little apartments, houses, whatever, town squares, and his employees would rent these homes from him, but Pullman would immediately deduct the rent out of their pay before they were even paid. So it's not even like he would give them money and then they had to write a separate check to him for rent. Oh, no. It got deducted from their pay. And the rent was already pretty high. I mean, like, it was actually cheaper to live outside of the town in which your, like, company is that you work for. But not only that, but Pullman literally controlled all of it. As in, he would send spies into the town to listen to, like, to have them listen to all the little gossip going on, and they would report back what they heard. And if he heard that an employee said something that he did not like, oh, they were fired. There's snitches around, so you gotta be careful what you say. So not just that, but he was also known to, like, bust up into someone's house unannounced, and if that home was not kept up to his cleanliness standard, which, by the way, was apparently very high standard of clean, like, not even like, oh, looks, does it look pristine? No, but it looks lived in and it looks decent, He wanted pristine. And if it was not pristine, you're out. So the employees are working for this man. They're renting their homes from him. He's deducting rent, right? He literally controls every aspect of their life, basically, or a very large chunk of it.
Fast forwarding several decades.
It is 1893. America was in a depression, an economic depression. And because of this, the profits at the Pullman Coach Car Company were down. And honestly, with any sort of economic depression that comes along, George laid off some workers, okay? And those who were left, their wages were cut by 25%. But the rent stayed the same. That's right. The workers were still required to pay the same amount of rent, which, as I stated before, was more expensive than just living in the city of Chicago with less money.
To demonstrate how high the rent was, for the workers living in the city of Pullman. If a worker made, say, $9.07 every other week, $9 of that check would go back to Mr. Pullman, and the worker would get to keep 7 cents to feed his family.
In a union, and we would also like to, arbitrate, to like negotiate what's going on here. Like we just want to, we'll even hire like a third party arbitrator to help us both come up with, a good deal. Georgia's response to this, and I quote, was, "There is nothing to arbitrate." Obviously, hearing this, they were done with dealing with Georgia's BS, right? Tired of it. So they go on strike. They walk off their job. And the American Railroad Union came up to them and was like, hey you guys, what's going on? Why are you striking? And they're like, oh, let me tell you. So they just told everyone, right? They're like, this is what he's doing. We're not making this up. He's cut our wages, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, we got you. They tell everybody in the railroad company, right? You work for a railroad? Oh, you know what's going on. So all of the railway employees boycott Pullman cars. The porters refuse to go on them. They won't even drive the trains. None of it. That literally brings America to its knees economically. It leaves passengers stranded. There's food and fuel that cannot get to where it needs to go. So the price of goods is skyrocketing. And obviously this is causing everyone in the whole country to be upset. Pullman and his like little, work cronies, if you will, they have pull in the government, right? Told you. His car got picked for Abraham Lincoln. He knows people in Chicago, whatever. They literally call up President Grover Cleveland and they're like, I don't understand what the workers are doing, basically. They're just kind of going crazy. I need help. So President Grover Cleveland, along with like whoever is in charge of this, because he may not have necessarily directed the call, but he was totally okay with this, sent in the National Guard to squash the protest. These soldiers aren't showing up to be like, oh, come on guys, let's get back to work, blah, 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 blah. No, they show up with guns that have bayonets on the end of them. Yeah, that worked out about as how well you think it worked out. It didn't. This led to dozens of people dying. And by the people, I mean just basically the strikers. I don't think there was really any soldiers harmed. And it kind of did the job. The strike came to an end. And unfortunately, it did not work out for the workers in the workers' favor. They had to basically return back to the Pullman car company, again, not making as much money and still having to pay rent. But at this time, word is starting to spread beyond the union. What all happened, right? Because keep in mind, the union heard from the workers. They know the truth. But more people are asking questions. They're like, well, why were they doing this? Like, what's going on? I don't understand. Like, people aren't just naturally crazy. What did you do? They're asking this to George. And George's like, I didn't do nothing. Well, then it starts to come out what he was doing. Everybody, including other railroad tycoons, were pissed at George. They're like, you brought our whole country down to its knees, price skyrocketing, passengers stranded, all of this, all because you wouldn't even go with them to the table to negotiate. What kind of businessman doesn't do that? Business people love negotiating. And again, the whole country really felt that most of the whole country were like, if you had at least attempted to meet them halfway, all of this could have been averted. But here is some slightly good news. Because of how the strike ended and all the violence that ensued and everything else, this sparked an investigation, right? So the Justice Department and some judges got involved and they're like, what happened here? So they get down to the nitty-gritty and figure it out. Now, at the end of this federal investigation, not only do they really find out how terrible of a boss George has been, they make his company de-invest from Pullman. That's right, the town of Pullman, no longer. They were required to give it back to the city of Chicago. So that was one slight, benefit of it. Some people died, but the town of Pullman is no more. And the workers didn't actually get what they wanted. Next on my list is Max Blahnik and Isaac Harris. Their story starts out the classic American story. The one we all hope for. You come from nowhere, you work hard, and you make a shit ton of money. They actually accomplished this, which is quite impressive. they are on the bad bosses list. And just in case some of you may or may not be familiar, the company that they owned was the Triangle Shirt Factory. Yeah, some of you already know, but some may not. Let's jump into it. These gentlemen were both immigrants from Russia. They wound up meeting in a tailor shop. They started working together, and they worked really well, and they decided to open their own shop in 1900, manufacturing shirt waist tops for women. Look, in the 1900s, those shirts were like just flying off the shelves. Like, they were super popular, and Max and Isaac jumped on it, okay? They're like, we're gonna manufacture the shit out of these, and they did. Look, they weren't the only producers of this shirt, but they were pretty business savvy, and they did really well. So much so that they were able to open more factories in New York, like have other locations in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And they went from living in a cramped apartment in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Okay. And this is when the Lower East Side of Manhattan was like a shithole. Like, that was a negative thing. To literally rolling up to their factories like in a chauffeured car. And then whenever they got out, Dr. Dre's next episode, the beginning part, we played like da 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 da, and that's how they entered into their factories.
None of those song creators were alive during this time. Not a single one.
If you are watching this and you want to know how you can go or how you become one of the top manufacturers of waist shirts tops, we are going to use some suggestions from Max and Isaac, okay? Here's what old Maxie Poo and Isaac.
Hi, just a quick warning. She's going to scratch her neck fairly soon, and it's going to turn really red. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That's just how her skin reacts.
Here did. First off, they invested in the best technology, right? They wanted shirts made quickly. So any machinery that could help make this process quicker, they invested in it. They also kept scrupulous tabs on their inventory, okay? So not only did they keep detailed records of what all they actually had, they also made sure that none of the employees were stealing. They had a foreman every night check all the ladies' purses before they left. Most of their employees were immigrant women, and none of them were walking out of one of their Triangle Shirt Factories with any shirt waist tops. And because they did so well, they also wound up moving into a new modern building. And this allowed them to create a factory in which the workers were discouraged, and it made it harder for them to talk to each other, which would mean getting distracted and obviously delaying product manufacturing. And not only that, but it also prevented them from chit-chatting about how they all hated their jobs, how little wages they were making, and just the utter shit conditions that Max and Isaac had them working in, period. Because the last time they did that, what they got was the ladies talking about unionizing, and they were not going to have that again. For a brief time, Max and Isaac had a little strike issue on their hands, okay? Their workers kind of got to chit-chatting again because they were in smaller groups, and they started being like, oh my god, this is awful. I didn't realize it wasn't just me. We're just miserable. It's all of us. So they all got together, decided to unionize. Max and Isaac again were like, oh hell no. And by again, I just meant with all the other bosses. They were like, hell no, you're not unionizing. Okay. Well, all the ladies walked out and everything else. And well, the workers did accomplish something. They did get more pay and slightly better hours, mostly because they started hitting it where Max and Isaac really felt it, in their pocketbooks. So they started making less profits. They actually did become agreeable to making some changes. Now, I would like to say they did also finally come to that after not only the profit falling, but they had also hired private detectives and just general thugs to follow the rebel rousers around and beat them and coerce them. That's what it is, I guess. Actually, it's not. That was awful of them, and they get worse. Now, here's something else they did. Max added an extra layer of security, okay? And by this, in this new factory, he locked one of the doors. So there's only one way in and one way out. You cannot get out. You can't sneak out of here, right? So no one is going to be stealing time from the Triangle Shirt Factory, much less actually stealing. So you can only come in one door and not out another, okay? There is one little problem with this. This does prevent people from exiting in case there's an emergency and they need to exit, not just because they're trying to take an extra smoke break or, just get out of the office for a bit. Such as, say, one of the floors of their building catches on fire. Max and Isaac had three floors in this new building. The 8th floor is the one that caught on fire, right? And as soon as the 8th floor realizes how bad it is and that, like, oh, we can't just put it out, they make a call. But unfortunately, the 9th floor didn't get the call. Max and Isaac were on the 10th floor. They got the call. They literally lived by jumping roofs onto the next building. Unfortunately, the employees on the 9th floor obviously did not get the call, nor did they even realize what was going on until smoke was billowing in through their doors. 100 people are trying to exit, but unfortunately, the one exit that is open, they can't go into it. It's already blocked off by the fire. So they tried the other door, and it's locked. So they're just stuck on the 9th floor, right? Most of these people, of the 200 people that were working that day, 146 of them died.
The 200 people she's referencing here were the amount of people who were strictly working on the 9th floor.
Of those 146, most of them chose to jump to their deaths. They preferred to die by the laws of gravity than die in an inferno. To be honest with you, I don't blame them. I would much rather jump to my death, I guess, than die in an inferno. Like, oh my god. Now, this became really big news. The whole town of New York and everywhere else was so interested in what happened. To the point, when they realized what happened, that Max and Isaac were put on trial for manslaughter, okay? They were put on trial for manslaughter. They were acquitted. Their defense, they hired a fancy lawyer, and their defense was, I didn't know the door was locked. I didn't tell anyone to lock the doors. Why was the doors locked? It's not my fault. It is, Max. It is. Because also, I'm not gonna lie, I went into the story thinking that, like, oh, this is how we have, this is why we now have safety codes. And no, safety codes were already in place. This fire happened in 1911. Yeah, even back then, the, like, New York fire department or commissioner, whoever the building code people are, was just like, oh, no, you need to leave those unlocked. That is a fire hazard, sir. Don't do that. Did they listen? No. And look, if you're wondering if they ever received any punishment for it, they did pay out retribution, okay? They finally agreed to settle with the families of those who died, and they paid their families a week's worth of wages. However, I would also like to point out, though, that Max and Isaac actually came out on the upper end of this. They wound up profiting $400 per employee that died. They got more out of their deaths from the fire insurance money than they even had put into opening this new factory to begin with. Now, I would say this. Max did get in trouble, though. In 1913, he did have to pay a $20 fine when he got busted for locking the door again. That's it. That was it, honestly. They got acquitted for manslaughter, and also only had to pay a $20 fine for doing the exact same thing he already did, and that got hundreds of people that a lot of people died from. And we are now down to my final and of the list of the people that I have mentioned before, which have all been gentlemen. I think I said gentlemen. Which have all been gentlemen, but not really. They don't deserve the title of gentleman. But this next person, I wasn't going to include her because she's a noble, and I kind of thought, I was like, nobles have been known, like, no one is shocked in history whenever they're like, oh, a king did something crazy and got away with it. What? But I would say this, because of what happened to her servants, because of what she did and required them to do, I would say out of these lists, she's definitely, I would say, number one of worst boss. And the lady, her name is Elizabeth Bathory. Really, Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary. Elizabeth was born in 1560, and she was, I mean, like I said, she was a noble lady, okay? She was really high up there in the rankings. Like, you know, all of her kinfolk were of some sort of high nobility, you know, buddy with the king and stuff like that. And, but so much so, like, she actually had pull and could, you know, like, potentially, if she wanted to, I don't think she ever even attempted, probably even overthrow the king and, you know, like, maybe put someone she wanted in place or, you know, would know that person. That's how high up there her family was. Well, here's the deal about Elizabeth, though. She is a sadistic serial killer. And there had always been rumors as soon as she settled into her little town in Hungary. There had always been like little whispers of her being sadistic, right? Like tortured her servants, really didn't want to let your girls around her, like just kind of whispers. But then her husband died. She got worse, okay? She wound up killing hundreds of girls.
She doesn't explain it here, but the reason why so many girls went to Elizabeth Castle were because of two reasons. The first, because of the peasants were strictly looking for work. She promised young girls employment. The other, the noble girls, went to her because she had opened what would be considered like a finishing school and promised the families that she would make them into proper women.
Now, the folklore about this is that she did it for like a Fountain of Youth situation, right? She had found the secret, and, right? She's like, okay, here's it all. I discovered my Fountain of Youth. I just need blood for that. Okay, we don't know that that's true or not. That's mostly a rumor. In reality, like I said, she was just a sadistic bitch. Like, I actually know, like, worse. She was a serial killer. After her husband died, she really went to town. I don't know if it's because like he wasn't there and she's like, I can kind of do whatever, blah blah blah, and she did it. Okay, so she did enough and she kept killing all these like peasants and just these, you know, some of her servants and all these other people around town. And honestly, the magistrate heard about this and he's like, no, we're not, don't touch her, don't dare go to her with that rumor, okay? Hearing nothing until she crosses the line. In 1610, she oversteps the boundaries, okay? She winds up killing some nobles' daughters, and supposedly more than one, right? So these are people who have pull too. And they hear this, right? These poor parents are like, my daughter has been murdered by this lady. I get she's a countess, but what the fuck? So the king hears about this, and he's like, oh shit. So he sends out an investigator. Oh, the whole town, they rat her out. They're just like, no, she's doing all of this fucked up shit. Okay, all of it. So they arrest her. I'm going to put that in quotes because she is a noble woman. But they also wind up arresting her servants. They're put on trial. Elizabeth is also on trial. Again, putting in quotes. And what winds up happening is 4 of her servants, right? A whole bunch of them were brought in on this situation. 4 of her servants go on trial for murder. 3 of them are executed. The 4th one gets life in prison. This is why I included her on the worst bosses list, is because it's the 1600s, okay? Your boss, the noble person, has been sadistically murdering all these young girls in your town. She's been doing this for a while. No one has said anything. Everyone knows about it, okay? And you're required to help her. Seriously, what were they supposed to do? They couldn't go to the police. Number one, they probably, even if they knew it's true, the police would not believe them. If Elizabeth found out, she would then kill them. I mean, because hello, they already see what she's done. Like, they have no choice, right? It's either, quote, do the right thing and not be believed and get murdered, or just pray that because of her high ranking, she never gets caught and you don't have to answer for what she required, for what she made you do. That doesn't happen, right? She's forcing them. They're on trial. It's not like she came to their defense. I mean, she's like, oh, that's not really their fault. I totally did it, or even I'm like, oh, my servants would never do anything like that. This is crazy. Blah, 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 blah. No, none of that happened. I mean, don't get me wrong. Are we shocked by any of it? No, we're not. It's the bad boss list. And just in general, anytime there's murder of a noble person being involved, you already know. Like, it does not end well for any of the actual, like, innocent people involved here, ever. What wound up happening to Elizabeth was, honestly, she was put on house arrest in her castle. Some have said, like, basically she was locked in her one room in her castle, can only get, like, food and air, you know, like, just a little slot. Others say, like, she just had the whole castle, she couldn't leave. Either way, she didn't die in prison, but obviously her punishment did not fit the crime at all. And her poor servants, they got the shit end of the stick, right? I would definitely say that earns you a bad boss. Number one on my personal list. These poor servants had zero recourse. They couldn't even threaten union, you know? I would also like to point this out. Modern scholars do question the validity of what Elizabeth was accused of, and for a couple reasons. Number one, she was very powerful, and apparently the king of Hungary at the time owed her a lot of money. And in exchange for canceling the debt, she got to just be on house arrest, right? And in their argument, they're basically saying, you know, she was a lady during this time who had a lot of power and wealth and just a whole bunch of other things, and all this evidence that is court document. It is properly documented. It's in the court record. A lot of it's hearsay. Her servants were tortured. Basically, they were saying the king was just trying to get out of paying his debt and take away some of her power because she was a very powerful woman even after her husband's death. To which I say, touche. I'm not saying that could not be a possibility, but in my mind, I would think it would be easier to take someone's money and power away from them than by accusing them of murdering and torturing young girls. I'm just saying. I just feel like there were other ways the king could get around that. I'm just throwing that out there. Another side note to that whole, like, modern scholars, you know, thinking like someone was just trying to take power away from her. There actually was a priest who was basically had nothing to do with anything, who did write in confirming what had already been said in the court records, right? Like, wasn't trying to take away power. He had no ties to nobody, and he was like, no, like, this is a real thing. We've seen it, we've heard about it. This isn't made up.
I wasn't able to find the priest that she was talking about, but there are court documents that do demonstrate there were several witnesses who did not gain anything from Elizabeth's downfall.
But who knows? I do think someone died, and clearly, even if this was a lie, that she really did not murder those people, her servant still died because of it. Like, I'm just saying. I hope you enjoyed my list. I hope you work for none of these people, or work for anyone close to like these people, and be thankful that we do live in a time to where please report your boss if you feel like they should be on this, if they're doing any of those things that were mentioned today. Definitely reconsider employment, and possibly, you know, maybe even calling somebody. Oh, and then also, just for funsies, threaten to unionize. Watch them have a fit. Be hilarious.
Please remember, she is an idiot on the internet who is unqualified to give anyone career advice.
But thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give a thumbs up, and again, subscribe if you want. No pressure. But my next video will be back to my other ones. I'm gonna talk about Rasputin, but otherwise, I hope you have a good day and get some rest. Especially if you're watching this at 2 a.m. and you've got to be at work tomorrow.